About the European investment policy, the state of the play. As you know, bilateral investment treaties were invented by European countries. The German one was the first one in 1994 with Pakistan. There are about 1,200 international investment agreements that have been signed by European countries and that have been usually rubber-stamped by national parliaments. Here and there you could hear some resistance on the occasion of one or two individual bids, but all in all you can say they have always been rubber-stamped. Now in 2009 you have the Lisbon Treaty, the new treaty which is the treaty that holds the European Union. That treaty said that foreign direct investment, as from 2009 onwards, will be part of the exclusive common commercial policy of the Union, foreign direct investment. And on that basis, the Commission has acted with a number of proposals. First proposal and first issue the Commission wanted to solve is, okay, if the Union now has the competence, what happens with the existing 1,200 bids? That needs to be clarified. And the Commission's proposal was, at first, the first thing they thought of was to put a sunset clause, so that after a few years they would fade out. This was already killed in the room. So already within the Commission, German and other commissioners intervened to make sure that the Commission would not propose this. Then the proposal the Commission came up with was the idea that all the existing bids would, by European law, by European regulation, be authorized, so that their existence was safe and that there was legal certainty. And they also proposed that in the future, in spite of the fact that foreign direct investment was part of the exclusive European competence, that the member states, the 27 member states, would still be allowed to continue to negotiate bids. So that there would be actually a competence in parallel. The Union would have competence to negotiate international investment treaties, but also the member states would continue to be able to do that. Now in Parliament, there was a new attempt to put back a sunset clause, but that also went nowhere. And the member states, when they saw the proposal of the Commission, they said, look, our bilateral investment treaties are valid. They have been ratified by us, they are valid, they don't need any authorization from the Union. So in your proposal, you should delete anything that refers to the Union authorizing the bids of the member states. And the member states also did everything they can to make sure that in the future they could still negotiate bids, and that this they could do without interference from the European Commission. Now this first proposal by the Commission about what should be done with the existing bids, that proposal is still under negotiation between the European Parliament and the European Council. And we hear very little about this. We worked a lot on it when it was in Parliament, but now that it's in negotiations between the Parliament and the Council, we don't know where it is going. Well, we fear that it, of course, will go much more in the direction of the Member States. But this is not so very important for us. We don't care very much what happens with the existing bids. We're much more concerned about what the new European policy was going to be. So the second proposal that the Commission made was, it came out with a document, a policy document, giving an idea of how it would see the European investment policy in the future. Now here there were no big surprises. The Commission adopted the usual approach. Here and there was some sign of hope. The Commission was talking in its proposal about more transparency. It was criticizing the investor dispute settlement regime as it existed. So it was pushing for, well, it was proposing more transparency. It was also making reference to OECD guidelines, to labor rights, to corporate social responsibility, which is also interesting. But when the Commission came with this document, the Council, so the European member states, reacted with their opinion on this proposal, and in their reaction, in their Council conclusions, they actually disregarded any option for reform, and they made sure that in what they came up with, that this would resemble as much as possible the 1,200 bids. And that is what we have been seeing since the Lisbon Treaty. That is, although the member states actually approved the Lisbon Treaty and actually approved the idea that the European Union would get competence in this, in their later action around the discussions about what the new EU policy would be, they have always defended their own bits, they have resisted reform, and they have tried to keep as much as competence themselves. Then the next step for the Commission was, if the European Commission, if it in the future would negotiate investment treaties, it needed a negotiating mandate. So in the European constellation, you have the European Commission, the European Parliament, and the European Council. The European Council is the representative of the member states. Any mandate for negotiations for treaties comes from the Council, so it comes from the member states. So the Commission, if it in the future wants to negotiate investment treaties, it has to ask permission from the Council, therefore from the member states. And the Commission wanted to, in the first instance, to start negotiating investment protection rules in the framework of ongoing bilateral free trade agreements. And it made proposals for Canada, for Singapore, and for India. And that discussion took a couple of months, and this discussion was concluded in August this year. The Council gave a mandate to negotiate investment protecting chapters in the framework of free trade agreements. The mandate that the Council gave was identical for the three countries. And again, we could see from the mandate that the member states had made sure that there would be no reform, and that in the future the European bids would look exactly the same as their own national bids. So we are now in a situation where negotiations for European investment protection agreements in the framework of free trade agreements, those negotiations are underway with three countries. And so we haven't seen any negotiating proposal yet, because the mandate is one thing. This is what the Council gives the Commission. But the basis on the basis of that mandate, the Commission has to come with negotiating text. It has actually to draft chapters on investment protection. And we don't know what these chapters will look like. In fact, the mandates we have posted on our website. Normally these are secretive documents. Nobody's allowed to see them. But we got hold of that, we put it on the website. The negotiating mandate is actually very short. It fits one page. It just lists all the protection standard that Natalie was showing here on her slide. It just lists them and make sure that these are being negotiated. So the uncertain factor is now still to see how the Commission will work with that mandate. Because since the mandate is very short, you could say, maybe still the Commission has some room for maneuver to come up with better texts. And I think that the Commission has this in its mind to a certain extent. For instance, it will say when it negotiates with Canada, we are proposing this, but the Canadians, they insist on that. So if we want to have a deal, we have to give the Canadians something. So the Commission might use this as an argument against the member states to get some kind of reform in the agreements. But since we have seen that actually the Commission has withdrawn and backtracked since 2009 on everything it said on investment, we don't think that the Commission will be very progressive in the way it will negotiate the agreements. Now, interestingly enough, in the discussions on the mandate, a number of member states said that they actually didn't want to have an investment protection agreement with Canada. And this is not because of progressive reasons. They don't want to negotiate with Canada because Canada, like the United States, they already have introduced some reform in the language that they have in their bids. And so a number of interest groups in Europe were afraid that if the European Union would negotiate with Canada first, that this would contaminate the European model for the future. It would contaminate the European precedents. So they rather preferred that there would not have been negotiations with Canada. but rather with India and certainly with Singapore, because with Singapore they feel that they're much more comfortable. Singapore has a text that is very close to the European approach. So a number of interests in the European Union wanted to have negotiations with Singapore first, then India, and then maybe Canada, but rather not. Now in the end, the agreement was that there would be negotiations with the three countries, that they would be launched at the same time, but still a number of member states were saying, okay, even if you launch with Canada, negotiations on bids, you can go slow on these and go faster on the others, so that the others will be the example that then also the Canadians will have to follow. So, but we don't know where these things stand, and we will, we are facing the difficulty that we always have, is that we now need to get hold of the negotiating text so that we can analyze that and maybe try to improve it. So the discussion on what happens with the existing bids is still ongoing. The mandates are there, the negotiations are ongoing. There's a fourth thing that still needs to be settled. That is the financial and legal responsibility in the future. The distribution of responsibility between the European Union and the member states. Meaning, if there is a European investor treaty, for instance between the European Union and Canada, then who will be responsible for the implementation of the agreement? The Union or the member states? And if there's a challenge of a company against a European government based on the EU-Canadian bid, then who will defend the European side? The member state or the Commission? And again, so for a certain part this can be solved by the text of the agreement, the future agreement, but for another part the European Commission needs to table a new legislative proposal. So the European Commission at the moment is working on that, and it will soon table a new proposal to the European Parliament, which will then be about the financial responsibility. So whether, if the European Union is challenged and if the European Union loses, whether the money will come from the European budget or whether it will come from the member state budget. And that is, I think, for us the last opportunity to have a debate on it in the European Parliament. And so we hope when this comes out that we can again stir up some discussion in the European Parliament, and also this time it might be interesting to have this discussion because this time it's about money, it's about who pays. Before we had discussions about principles and policy space and support, rather abstract for some, but now with this proposal that has to go to the European Parliament, I hope that members of Parliament will now realize that indeed these investment treaties, they will cost money, and it will have to come from their budget. And we hope that the Parliament will also use this opportunity to say, look, hold on, if it has to come from our budget, then maybe you still have to listen to what we said. Because here, and I will conclude with that, when the Commission came with this proposal in 2009, with its ideas about the future investment policy, the European Parliament responded with a resolution. In this resolution, the European Parliament indicated a number of principles. And we have done our best to influence this position by the Parliament. So in the resolution by the Parliament on the future EU investment policy, there are some elements that we can use in our discussion with the Commission and the Member States, which are useful. For instance, on transparency. And I think Rose in the Parliament on Tuesday will give on Monday will give an overview of the difference between the parliamentary resolution and the mandates and the policy as it has been developed. But it is clear that what the European Parliament said about investment policy is not being put in practice if you look at the mandates that the Council has given the Commission. So now we can say, when we have the discussion about the financial responsibility, look, if the Parliament has to approve financial responsibility of the European budget with regard to investment, then the Parliament must insist that the mandates and the international investment agreements that will come out, that they will comply with some of the demands that the European Parliament put. So that is our last opportunity in the next few months to still influence the debate. After that, the public debates are almost closed, and I mean the formal ones. And if we in the future still want to discuss the European investment policy, we have to organize that discussion ourselves. We have to organize it every time when there is a ratification debate of a bilateral investment treaty by one of the member states. We have to organize it when a European investment treaty comes to the European Parliament and so forth. So we will continue to stir this up, but the major debates on what the European future policy will look like, they are nearly closed. And we must say that although we have gained ground in the European Parliament, we had a very difficult time with the member states. And the member states, they resisted any reform, and still today. And so we hope that in the future, with discussions about the ratification of bilateral treaties, we can still, gain some ground in national parliaments. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Marc.